Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Young Cape. Today we are interviewing Jack Miller, who is the founder and current leader of the Cape Party, who's moving for Cape secession, and was a prominent feature in the recent Cape Independence March in Stellenbosch. So, good morning. Anything you'd like to add to that description?
Morning, Rob. Good to be with you. Well, no, I mean, before we were on air now, we sort of touched on the roots of the Cape Party and the identity of the people behind it. And one of the things I was saying is that from the start, I've been very cautious to have people attach too much value to this idea, to a specific individual or personality. And we've always encouraged our supporters to thoroughly read the manifesto and internalize it and become a bastion for the idea themselves. And so, your initial questions with regards to how it all started, it's an idea that I think exists. If you understand the history of the Cape and the history of South Africa, you realize that Cape independence is not just a concept that I think is desirable. We believe it's inevitable. And I think the political tensions that we're seeing in this country are going to result in these artificial borders which were imposed on us in 1910 falling apart, not just for the Cape, but for the entire Union of South Africa, including KwaZulu-Natal, the Abu Tembes in the Eastern Cape, and many other parts of the country.
I think that's very sound. I mean, I remember we had Mansell Upham on this channel a while ago, and he framed it in an interesting way in which he sort of saw Cape nationalism and Cape identity in general as being a part of something akin to decolonization, which I think people. It's a big buzzword now, but I think people appreciate that sort of the sort of expedient models of exerting power that a lot of international empires and forces have placed on various nations. It doesn't last, and these sort of these moves for temporary expediency and economic benefit are not designed for the welfare of the people on the ground, and we're still living with these results.
Absolutely right. And I think if you look through history from the Roman Empire to the apartheid government, whenever you have these centralized systems which invariably oppress a large number of people, those forces, those tensions can only be managed for a certain amount of time. And I think that South Africa has just gone over 100 years, and this artificial construct is beginning to tear apart at the seams.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I looked at if you look at any map of South Africa today, you'll still see that in general the territories, the sort of linguistic boundaries of where everyone lives, are very, very similar to what they've been for a very, very long time. And I think even considering the enormous sort of urbanization that we saw during the past 100 years. The sort of the big clusters are still there, and the Cape, for example, remains largely different for various reasons, and it's still not a it's never been a homogeneous territory, but it's always had its own character in terms of language, religion, political beliefs, and so on. And I'm sure that you and your father, who I believe got involved in the similar question as early as, was it 93? We're picking up
Yeah.
on similar things that you'd noticed.
Yeah, he worked throughout Africa. So he was in mining, and he experienced a lot of conflict through a number of African countries firsthand. And I think that he saw the dangers involved with specifically the ANC. In 1993, he was very good friends with Dr. Mario Ambrosini, the right-hand man of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi and the IFP. And he had many meetings with them, as well as the Progressive Freedom Party. At that time, Francis Kendall and Leon Lowe had written the book South Africa, the Solution. there was a lot of interesting concepts floating around about what the new South Africa might look like. And based upon my father's experiences through Africa and his analysis of the ANC and particularly the Tripartite Alliance, a lot of people just look at the ANC as themselves and forget the two organizations behind them, COSATU and the SACP. And the ANC have chosen these partners not out of thumbsuck chance, but because these people are ideologically bound to the identity within the ANC. And this type of ideology invariably results 26 years later now in property rights being thrown out the window, expropriation without compensation, absolute fascist centralized control to enforce their dictate. And they use race as a tool, a political tool to further their communist agenda. And similarly so, the apartheid government used race as a political tool to justify their position of power. And so the Cape Party has long stood from the position that we're opposed to the ANC regime, but we're equally opposed to the apartheid state, and primarily the genesis of this, which was the British Empire imposing the artificial union of South Africa on us in 1910. So I think my father's insights into what the ANC was invariably going to become, he knew this at a very early stage. And then in 2007, after I had graduated from UCT, I had a choice to either continue my studies abroad or fight the good fight for making the Cape a better place. And not just the Cape, but the whole of South Africa. We really believe that these types of policies are not just policies which would work in the Cape. Obviously, this is my home, so this is what I fight for, and it's the keys in the name, the Cape Party. We're exclusively built to fight for the Cape people and Cape interests. But we would love to see, well, the IFP is the Zulu Party. We'd like to see the Abu Tembu Party. We've got good relationships with the Abu Tembu royal family. We've got good relationships with secession movements in KZN. We are fully aware of the frustrations in Lesotho, where the Sothos there feel like they got hard done by when the British basically decided that's what Lesotho would be. We know that there's Tswanas in the north of the country who would rather join their brethren in Botswana because the standard of living of Tswana people in Botswana is higher than the standard of living of Tswana people in South Africa. So yes, in 2007, when I started this, it was we didn't think we had much time. The ANC had declared war on the Cape many years before, and through draining us of our resources, we can talk about the division of revenue just now, but draining our resources, imposing these unbelievably racist policies, Black Economic Empowerment, Employment Equity Act, quota systems, which discriminate 70% of the Cape population. These policies we had to fight against. And the DA wasn't doing it. The ACDP wasn't doing it. The Freedom Front wasn't doing it. None of the political parties that represented us in the Cape were really fighting for the Cape people's best interest. So this is why we formed the Cape Party. And primarily if the ANC as well as DA, if they do not negotiate, if they're not willing to negotiate on decentralization of those powers, we would then push for the ultimate ace card, and that is a referendum on Cape independence. And if the people of the Cape voted in favor, we would then have the most powerful bargaining chip to threaten the ANC government to either change their policies, or if they don't, declare the Cape an independent country.
So for you, the referendum isn't, of course, the last step. It's would I be being too bold to characterize your position as a by any means necessary one?
Secession by any means necessary, or No, and I think it's dangerous to be by any means necessary in the world of politics. And this
Mm,
is what a lot of people, I think, do I believe that it is the only real practical solution? Yes, I do.
mm,
But am I going to be so emotively attached to it that I'm not willing to sit down and negotiate with the current power holders in the form of the ANC and the national government and go, listen, we want to give you an opportunity to straight the ship here. And there are things that you can do that we can negotiate on that will alleviate many of the concerns that the people of the Cape have. And I think it's a far more practical and realistic path to take. And I think it's, from a human point of view, at the end of the day, even if the Cape becomes independent, we're still going to be neighbors with our friends in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal and other parts of the country. And we want to have good trade relationships with these entities. And so the last thing we want to do is enter into any sort of hostile, certainly an inability to talk. I think anything can be discussed and solved if you're approaching it from a rational human perspective.
mm.
And I think that's still possible with the ANC. Certainly in my interactions with the EFF, I did a debate with them a few weeks ago, and it was unfortunately there was very little communication going on. I was trying to, say, hi, these are our views. I'm interested in hearing your views. Let's talk about this.
I saw that.
Maybe
I saw that
maybe
interview.
you can enlighten me and maybe I can enlighten you. If your ideas are good enough, I'll change my ideas. I'm willing to be convinced. If you have good ideas, I'll change my view. But hopefully, you look at the view in an open mind, look at the world from an open-minded perspective. And if I've got good ideas, maybe you'll incorporate some of them. But I don't know. I don't even know if he knew that he was in a debate with me, because he just basically said whatever he wanted to say, and incredibly racist, incredibly insulting. But I understand it's politics, so that's the way it goes.
My favorite sort of feature of those tirades that the EFF and similar go on is that they constantly use sort of 19th century insults like buffoon, which make them sound very comical.
I smite you, yes. Yeah,
Hilarious.
that was it was a
You just
joke.
sit, I was watching you very politely waiting for him to end his sort of insane tirade. And just, yes, well, we're on the news now. I'm going to wait for the children to finish. Ah, shame. But I mean, look, I think we all know that the EFF are not a reasonable party. They have no interest in reasoning with others. They make demands and they make threats, and then they bargain for what they want if they can't take it outright. And so I think I think the thing is that if you there's that sort of extremely radical and uncompromising approach is sort of alien to the Cape in general. There tends to be more sort of like liberal, considered, consensus approach to matters.
Absolutely right. Throughout our history, the largest protest against the apartheid government was put together by someone called Sailor Malan, and he formed the Torch Commandos. And this was a collection of 500,000 white Cape citizens voting or marching at night with pitchforks and torches to the parliament against the apartheid government, saying you will not remove colored people from the voters' roll. This is how, and this history of the Cape is so conveniently forgotten by the ANC. And in fact, all the parties, I mean, the DA is pathetic. They're a pathetic opposition party. They buy into the entire narrative that the ANC projects onto us. And it's factually incorrect. So,
yeah, I mean, to quote one of the nasty old bastards from the old days, as jy jou opponent se uitgangspunt aanvaar, dan verloor jy die debat. If you accept your opponent's frame, you lose the debate.
Exactly. Yeah, and it seems like these opposition parties are all too willing to accept the framing of the debate, and the framing of the debate is so horribly wrong that you can't depart from those premises and have a rational discussion. So, the very first governor of the Cape, Simon van der Stel, after which Stellenbosch is named, was a colored man. He was a colored man. He was a man of mixed race. So here you have the most powerful man in the Cape in the early 1970 something. He was the first governor of the Cape, and the ANC will have us believe that it was nothing but white oppression and tyranny. And sure, certainly, the world's history is complicated, and these things aren't binary.
Well, I mean, yeah, we can't avoid the fact that white people were culturally and economically dominant in the Cape and have been since it became a political entity. But I think what you're picking on quite rightly is that it wasn't such an absolutist exclusionary system as we're told it was. That there's this idea that people try and project back into time what life was like in the mid to late 20th century, and then say that was the whole of our history. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, we need to keep in mind that it was predominantly males that came over on the boats, and the slaves who first came through to the Cape came from Indonesia, Malaysia, Madagascar, etc. And in fact, the VOC was banned from, prevented from enslaving or engaging in any violent acts against the local inhabitants. This was written in the VOC charters. And what you happen after the second generation, obviously only being primarily males coming from Holland, you had a second generation of mixed race people as these people intermarried and formed the seeds of what is today the largest population in the Cape. And so some of the most powerful landowners within the first few generations of the Cape were people of mixed race. And many Afrikaners, white Afrikaners in South Africa today, they did some genetic studies a few years back and found that the vast majority, almost every single white Afrikaner going back to the 1600s, can trace some form of Khoisan or Malaysian, Indonesian genetics. So this is an inescapable part of our history, and let's also look at the greatest loss of Black life in Southern Africa's history. It wasn't at the hands of the Dutch. It wasn't at the hands of the British. Wasn't at the hands of the Khoisan against the Xhosa. In fact, the Khoisan and the British, as well as the Khoisan and the Boers, fought side by side against the Xhosas in the 9 Xhosa Wars. But the greatest loss of Black life was at the hands of one of the greatest military generals in African history, and that is Shaka Zulu and the Imfakane. So, depending on historical records, between 1 to 2 million Black lives were lost in the Imfakane. So, these are all parts of history that are conveniently forgotten by the ANC because it doesn't fit their agenda.
Well, I mean, I sort of look at that with a bit of with a strange eye. I mean, I know that a lot of white South Africans like trying to do the thing of saying of pointing out hypocrisy, where their murderers are allowed statues, our murderers are not, and but I don't want to shame them for holding up their sort of historical founders as bloody as the history could be. I mean, the French have statues to Charlemagne, so why not statues to Shaka?
Don't misunderstand me. I think Shaka Zulu needs to be given all the credit in the world for being such an effective military leader. So no, there's no shame in this at all. The shame is people who attach shame to this are generally the ones who are trying to tear down all statues, Shaka Zulu's statue as well as any other statue that reminds them of a history which is inconvenient to their worldview today.
Yeah, and you can think how far it can go if you let it run its course. I mean, in India right now, there are people who believe that the Taj Mahal must be removed because they're a reminder of the Mughal domination centuries ago, before the British even showed up. So if you push this too far, you destroy things of great value. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that right now, as the ANC moves with its sort of reform programs through the institutions, not just them, but also their ideological allies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything's going down the memory hole.
Mm. Yeah, I think one of the big things that's also forgotten is that for some reason it seems to be a surprise to a lot of people that the Cape existed as something of its own thing beforehand. I think the narrative that a lot of people have in their minds is more that South Africa is an outgrowth of the Cape, rather than that the Cape was its own thing that got captured and forcibly incorporated.
I find it's even
How big do you think that these sort of the reshaping of these historical narratives play a role in your attempt to sell this movement?
That's a really good question. Let me get to that just now. The first point you raised, I think it's even worse than people seeing South Africa as sort of emerging out of the Cape, which it's partially true, but then you're disregarding the great expansion of the Zulu nation, and the Bantu migration, and there's all sorts of historical elements here that are being ignored. So the worst perspective is that people say, oh, Jan van Riebeeck arrived in South Africa in 1652. So this, but 99% of people say this. Jan van Riebeeck arrived in South Africa in 1652. And this is, it might seem like a subtle mistake, but it's not. It's a fundamental mistake, because people are buying into the apartheid narrative. They're buying into the ANC narrative that South Africa has always existed. It has always been this way. It was evil in the past, and now the ANC is here to fix it. Yeah. When for 250 years or so, it was a very different political construct. In fact, multiple independent nations prior to 1910. And this is obviously conveniently forgotten because it didn't suit the apartheid regime and it doesn't suit the ANC regime. So sorry, your second question was?
Yeah, I was thinking, how does this fit into the way that you explain your movement and your position to people?
Yeah. It used to be back in 2007, myself, Adrian Kay, my late father, we're all students of history, and really just, I think you can learn so much from it. And I mean, it's sort of a cliche saying, but it's very difficult to predict where you're going if you don't know where you came from, but it really is true, I believe. And there's a lot to be learned from South Africa's history. And so the history of the Cape was it was our primary focus, I'd say, because it's just so blindingly obvious. We were independent before 1910. It didn't work under the British Empire. It didn't work under the apartheid regime. It's not working under the ANC. It doesn't matter what your skin color or language group or political beliefs. It's failed for 100 years. So let's put an end to this colonial mistake and govern in a decentralized system, which would benefit everyone across the whole of South Africa, Zulu, Xhosa, the Cape. So, but I think it's a little bit of an academic argument, and it's lovely to go there for those who are willing to discuss the academic argument. As we see with the EFF, that's sometimes not possible. So these days we keep it quite simple, really. Just about from every angle you want to look at it, Cape independence makes sense. It is a common sense idea. But the most effective way, I think, to look at it, and the one which really hurts people today, is economics. It's a very simple argument to understand as to why the Cape should be independent. It's one of the strong arguments for why the Catalonians want to separate from Madrid. Barcelona wants to break away from Madrid. And I laughed when I heard it. It's approximately 7% that I believe Catalonia is losing out. The discrepancy, the amount of taxes that they pay to Madrid, the amount of taxes that Barcelona gets back. So it's about 7% that they lose. Yeah. We're losing 75% here in the Western Cape. So it's it's a no-brainer. So, you know,
It's funny. It
uh,
could be worse. You could be they could be like the Scots. There's actually a contingent of the English who want the Scots to bugger off because they're a drag on the economic system. A net negative. But yeah,
yeah.
no, great
Well,
point.
you know, I don't think it's too far-fetched that there are many in the EFF who and the ANC who might go, you know what, we're just so sick of those people in the Cape. You know, they never vote for us. We always get destroyed in elections. You know, we've got no foothold in the Cape. Let's just be rid of these people. So, and yeah, I don't think it's
Mm,
too far-fetched that
I
they
I
may want
would I would contend, however, that their position is much more that of a conquering army, and they believe that they
to.
deserve to own the Cape and dominate all those who live in it. And it shapes a lot of the sort of shack resettlement policy that has been organized by the ANC for several years, which we sort of generally attribute to a spontaneous movement, but from what I've learned from various people, it seems to actually be a fairly coordinated and centralized policy, which has now, of course, been formalized since they had abandoned the building of houses in favor of telling people where to put up shacks.
But this has been openly admitted by the ANC and the EFF. They've openly stated it. I don't think the upper ANC ranks have liked it very much, but there've been a number of, I think Julius Malema outright said it,
Hmm?
and a number of ANC officials over many years have openly stated that it's their intention to send in predominantly ANC supporting voters into the Western Cape. So yeah, it's I think it's a well accepted policy of the South African government. Um, yeah, you know, but I think another problem with this narrative is that the ANC and even more so the EFF is so arrogant that they think that they speak on behalf of all black people, and it's such a low resolution view of people and cultures and ethnicities. It's, you know, like all white people are the same. You know, tell that to the Germans and the French and the Italians and the British, you know, in World War I and World War II. You know, tell that to the Xhosas and the Zulus through many blood-soaked years of Mkhonto weSizwe and Inkatha. Told that to the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda. You know, all blacks are not the same, all whites are not the same. People are people. People are different, and you know, we get some really eye-opening comments from, you know, social media as well as emails, and supporters of ours who are black, who say that they're absolutely embarrassed by the comments and the rants from the EFF and how arrogant they are to say that they speak on behalf of all black people.
Mm.
And it's very interesting saying in America, the greatest enemy of the Irish immigrants was the next Irish immigrant coming off the boat behind him. So,
Oh no, now you're making me think of gangs in New York. But
so,
it's funny
so,
what you
so
were saying. If it's funny what you're saying about all of this, because there seems to be an untapped political market amongst black Capians, for about lack of a better term, which is that a lot of them live under predatory conditions imposed on them by extortion rackets linked to the NDR parties, you know, NCEFF. And it strikes me that I haven't seen any members of the opposition offer them freedom from the extortion rackets as a sort of electoral pitch. I don't know what you think of that, but it strikes me as an enormous missed opportunity.
absolutely. And I think a perfect point to prove this is so we conducted polling a few years back. It was a rudimentary poll. We did a few more advanced polls since then, but it was a rudimentary poll, but it revealed some fascinating insights into the mindset of Cape, specifically Cape Town, but broadly. I mean, 70% of the Cape population is in Cape Town. So we did polls. The question was, would you be in favor of an independent Cape? Durbanville and Athlone were the highest votes at 75%. So
Yeah.
this is white Afrikaans speaking, colored English, colored Afrikaans speaking.
And a few Indians floating around there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you know the Athlone demographic, the Durbanville demographic. So we were getting around 75% in favor of Cape Independence in Durbanville and Athlone. Langa, we got 70% in favor of Cape Independence. Now, an important point to mention is in the polling, we only did landline phone calls. So that's going to warp the numbers a little bit. Generally, if you're someone who has a landline, you're far more established. You're probably a higher income group. I think there's a few factors that would play into landline answered. So very interesting number, 70% in Langa. In Panorama, which you would say, and yeah, Langa is an old established Black community.
Oh, yes.
And many of them Afrikaans speaking. Panorama, that's half white, half colored, English, Afrikaans speaking, sort of a mixed community there. And we got around 60% in favor of Cape Independence there. Khayelitsha came in at around about 45%. So a big discrepancy between Khayelitsha and Langa. And you can understand why that is if you understand that there's obviously limited resources in a territory, and many of these people in Khayelitsha arrived in the Cape far more recently, and so are a threat to the economic livelihood of people living in Langa and similar neighborhoods. So, and then the absolute stone cold worst result. You want to take a guess?
Somewhere in the southern suburbs, I'm assuming.
Okay, you're getting hot. Absolutely. I'll tell you, it was 20%. 20% in favor of Cape Independence. And the company that did the polling for us said, let me tell you, when we call these, it was hostile. Phones got slammed down. They were sworn at. I mean, I felt sorry for the company that did the polling. They said, who the hell are you to call us and ask questions like this? 80%, rather to say 20% in favor of Cape Independence, is better to say 80% opposed, hated the idea of Cape Independence.
Yeah?
White, upper class English speakers. Constantia hated the idea. It was vitriolic. And, the irony is a lot
surprising
of the people
nobody, of course. I mean, yeah, we all know the type, I mean, I actually lived in England for nearly 5 years, and I have less of an English accent than most of these people. I don't even know where they pull it from.
Totally. No, it's, yeah. And, I mean, the irony is I know these people well, and, yeah, it's tragic. And a lot of these people have a disproportionate amount of power in society. So these are the types of people that control media outlets, radio stations, newspapers, etc., that are the funders of the DA and parties like it. So you've got this incredibly warped disconnect between this type of ideology, which lives in, what's so ironic is that these people are so self-righteous. They think that their viewpoint is to the benefit of coloreds and blacks and all non-whites, and it's like this guilt that they live with. They're the only ones that live in this warped mindset.
They're the white people who carry the burden of Black Africa for us, you understand, because only they are enlightened enough to understand it.
Exactly. That in itself is so racist and so arrogant.
Absolutely.
These people are so arrogant and so racist that, I think the entire, much of this socialist communist agenda is in itself inherently racist, because it takes away the power of the individual, the capacity, the self-worth of an individual. Basically say,
Let the
you are
philosopher
so,
king sort it for you.
exactly, you are so worthless that you just sit there and do nothing. And we're just going to centralize everything and give you free handouts because you're incapable of working for yourself and being a free sovereign individual.
Oh, have some faith in the people.
Sorry?
Have some faith in the people.
Exactly.
It's funny. I was speaking to someone from Switzerland recently. They're not Swiss. They're actually originally South African, but they were telling me that because they worked in Brussels for a bit, and they were telling me that there were people that were that they encountered in who worked for the EU had this very strange attitude where they sort of, whenever you mention that things are going badly in South Africa, where you mention farm murders, crime rate, whatever, dispossession, expropriation, the one thing that keeps coming up is simultaneously they'll say, white people, they'll sort of insinuate that white people deserve it because they're racist. But then on the other hand, they'll say, well, I mean, of course things are going bad. It's Africa. That's what they like. And there's that, you can see that strange dichotomy emerging from it that you see in Constantia, that internationalist mindset of, well, Africans aren't good enough to govern themselves, but we certainly wouldn't want the white plebs coming anywhere near politics,
Yeah, it's doublespeak. It's so yeah, it's two entirely contradictory beliefs that they hold in their mind at the same time and speak out of both sides of their mouths.
Okay, well, I mean, enough of the identity stuff. I just thought, more on the policy front before we sort of wind up. I noticed that you have you mentioned that you have a sort of bond with the IFP, and I was interested in what ideas you shared with them, because I know that you're very big on the whole sort of cantonization. Speaking of Switzerland, the Swiss, and a lot of sort of localization, more direct sort of accountability. What can you tell us about these sort of constitutional factors that you've been keeping an eye on?
Well, I wouldn't want to say that. I want to say I've got a lot of respect for the IFP, the Buthelezi family, their history. I think they've been incredible ambassadors for their people, as well as holding very honorable political beliefs. So I personally have got good relationships with them, but I can't say that we certainly we discuss influence in any way their political belief system or vice versa. What I admired certainly when I was younger and a great fan of theirs is this federalist view, and I think sort of going back to a point that I was going to link this into was in '94. You had essentially two political ideologies that may at first glance seem contradictory to each other, but they aren't at all. The National Party and the ANC were perfect bedfellows. And if we wanted a sort of a real diversion away from centrist racial identity politics, it would have been far more beneficial to have more serious negotiations with Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi and this type of ideology of South Africa being a federal country. And we could have been an absolutely fantastic country where each of the provinces had far more control over the taxes that they paid, the policies that they live under, language policies, etc. So we could have had a brilliant country without this racist, fascist, communist agenda that we're now living under. So I think that the IFP, I think they will reemerge in the coming years. I think we're going to see a strong Zulu identity returning. I think that the ANC is going to be incapable of trying to keep their communist fingers off the Ingonyama Trust and every single asset that they can get their hands on in South Africa, which is part of this whole expropriation without compensation thing. Race and the wicked white Afrikaners is just it's a political tool for them to achieve their commercial ends. So I think the IFP will play an important role in that. I think Kings Willetini. It's interesting to see what's happening with Jacob Zuma. This is all unfolding as we speak, so it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, tremendous respect for the IFP, their federalist viewpoint. It's interesting to see too that here in the Cape now, political parties that have been opposed to us for so many years are now starting to adopt a few of our key policies, which is a great thing to see. But we obviously hope that voters, just because it's now popular to believe in decentralization and secession, we certainly hope that voters will still realize who the real McCoys are. And we've been fighting this thing through tooth and nail and bullets flying overhead when it wasn't popular. I mean, I've had serious fights with friends, school friends, you know, through the years who just didn't see it. And now all of a sudden it makes so much sense. But that's fine. You know, when you see something, when you understand it,
best to buy
great.
Bitcoin when it's worth pennies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, I think it's extraordinary. Someone had to come first, and I actually only first heard about you in, I think, 2014. I would have first heard about that, and it was still mocked, but there's that usual sort of tone that comes with the mockery when you're in UCT, which is, it's not like, oh, haha, they're just trying something, it's funny. There's also like, yes, and also white privilege. So it's like, even if you're like not even a blip on the radar yet, people still want to, you know, crush you. And I think this is madness, you know. But yeah. But yeah, maybe they were right to be sort of intimidated by the idea, you know, because I think it's sort of gathered a bit of steam.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I've said this. You know, when my father came out in 1993 for the Committee for the Cape Republic, you know, they said he was too early, and great idea, loved it, but sorry, too early. And when I started this in 2007, they said great idea, but sorry, you're too late. So yeah, but it's amazing to see how much destruction is possible in a country. You know, my capacity for this destruction, you know, reached breaking point, you know, back then in 2007. But it's remarkable to see how much people are willing to take. I mean, you know, is there not a point? You know, you don't even need to read alternative news or things like that, but you just need to read mainstream media over the last 15 years. And is there not something in there on a monthly basis that you read and go, this is not working. This is absolutely failing. You know, if it's not the, you know, the rolling electricity blackouts or the, you know, the arms scandal and Nkandla and, you know, just the dropping the education down to 30% to junk status. I mean,
it really is getting to the point where that taboo comparison with apartheid is being made by every single person in the country. You know, the people who educated enough to know where the red lines are that'll get you fired, they know they're not allowed to think it, but everyone knows that the comparison now is actually, you know. And once you've gotten to that point where something that everyone agrees is a horrific tyranny becomes much of a muchness in comparison with your current circumstances, what are you doing clinging onto the current system? It's madness.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've passed that tipping point. So I'm surprised that tipping point wasn't 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I think we can safely say that it almost took this lockdown to really break the camel's back. I think that the government's handling of this whole thing and complete destruction of the economy. I mean, I see no other reason for this ridiculous tyranny which we're all exposed to. It looks like another one's coming down the road.
Yeah.
And there's a court ruling on this. The thing's illegal. These lockdowns are illegal, and the government just does whatever they want, and the media just perpetuates it. So it's ridiculous. But that's fine. That's good for us. We actually like it when Julius Malema and the EFF, tried to burn down Cape schools and threaten the Cape, and we like it when the ANC tries to, they remove their mask. There's no now this facade of a rainbow nation. They cannot sit down and look us in the eye with a straight face and say, you know what, Jack, we still believe in the rainbow nation and we don't know why you want to make the Cape independent. The plethora of information out there now and evidence against the ANC and EFF, they can't backtrack on this. They've exposed themselves so badly that we can quite easily say, look, thank you, but no thank you. You're more than welcome to destroy the rest of the country, but we're not going to have it here. We can have a rainbow nation right here in an independent Western Cape. Thank you and goodbye.
I agree. And the awful part is how anyone who's read a bit of history should have seen this coming. And because of this false dichotomy imposed on us where we had to choose between sticking with the second or the third dispensation, people are going, oh, well, if you don't like the ANC, then you want to go back to apartheid. And it's kind of like, it's just not, it's absolute madness. And I think if you read what the ANC have been saying since 1960s, you'll know that it was headed here from the get-go. The sort of exclusive racialism that not only excluded whites, but also other minorities, goes back to the Morogoro Conference, and and even outside of the ANC, when you look at Steve Biko, who says that coloureds and Indians have some of the human quality that blacks have, and how do you all these decades later still cling to these horrendous and outdated and dehumanizing ideas? It beggars belief, really. And I think everyone's glad to see some fresh voices on the scene to sort of ruffle a few feathers. I mean, that Stellenbosch was such a success. I was really chuffed watching you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was a really, really fantastic day, brilliant event, and Cape Independence. We really believe it is inevitable. It's in the soil, it's in the history of this land, and I think people are starting to wake up to that. And again, it's not a Cape thing. It's just because we're based here, but KZN independence, I think, is coming down the road. The discontent is throughout the entire union of South Africa. So yeah, I think we're going to see Cape Independence marches getting bigger and bigger. We're hoping to do very well in next year's elections, and the ideal goal is to drive the DA underneath 50%. What a lot of people don't realize is that the ANC is to South Africa what the DA is to the Western Cape, and the DA is our stumbling block. They are the gatekeepers that are preventing us from liberating ourselves, because they buy into this South African nationalist agenda. They're centrists, they're high tax liberals, just like the not too different from the ANC, which is why people call them ANC light. And
hey, at least they've abandoned racial discrimination now, so that's a start.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's implicit in their premises. We spoke about that earlier. They have a worldview that is very closely aligned. They accept all the ANC premises.
I'm so glad to see them pulling in different directions now. You can sort of see the tension between the progressive, the classic liberal, and like that, and then the few reactionaries in between, sort of all pushing in different directions now. And it's fun to see because we're starting to see some real stuff coming out of there, which makes me optimistic.
And people need to be heartened by that, and we need to keep on prodding them and pushing them until they
carrots and sticks.
Both
Yeah.
from both angles. Yeah, we need to get them to, because these people are pure opportunists, and this is, you know, I've got good relationships with a number of people in the DA and Freedom Front and ACDP, and in fact, you know, there's a few people in the ANC that I communicate with in a very amicable way. So you know, it's important not to forget the human element to it, but we are very cynical, and people must excuse us if we're cynical, that we would rather not trust the DA and the Freedom Front's word when they say that they're in favor. Well, the Freedom Front saying they're in favor of Cape independence, we like that. That's fantastic. It's a very good sign. But you know, that's a new stance that they've taken up in the last month and a half. Are they only doing that because it's 8 months to go before the elections and they know that it's an opportune time to do it? Whether that's the case or not, we're very happy to see them making that stand. But I think voters also need to understand that, okay, if they want a 100% guaranteed vote for an organization that is going to fight sincerely, tooth and nail, for Cape independence, it's probably the same group that has been doing it for 13 years when it wasn't possible, when its executives had many business actually Freudian slip there, business offers to join other political parties. And we said, thank you very much, but we have values. So I think it's that organization that is certainly going to be the most sincere when it comes to fighting for independence. So this is why we hope people take heart from seeing the Freedom Front come this direction. Take heart from seeing the DA in last year's election saying that they are going to give us a provincial police force and a provincial railway service, which is something that we absolutely endorse. We think that's fantastic, and now they're moving far more towards Cape Party policy. And these are good signs, and we need to keep on pushing them. And the way we do that is by taking away their piggy bank and knock them underneath 50%. Many of these people are career politicians, and they have no values, they have no morals. And the only way that you can get them to listen to you is at the ballot box and through your taxes. And this is where we need to hold them to account. And so we're happy to see the DA coming our way. We're happy to see the Freedom Front coming our way. We hope the ACDP will also come our way. But guys, let's keep on pushing. And we certainly hope that people see the Cape Party as the vehicle to get this done.
No, that's fantastic. I look forward to seeing more of the tail wagging the dog in this story. All right.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's such a crazy concept, you know. I mean, it's fantastic. People don't realize how good. This is the one thing I will literally praise the South African political system for. We have a brilliant political system. It's actually very, very good. But the DA has been very smart, and I think the ANC also uses this trick. The DA has been very smart at lying to the voters. And the lie that they tell is that if you do not vote for the DA, the ANC will get in.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And
it's like in the ANC of like, if you let the DA and then we go back to apartheid. Like
exactly. And
at least the DA is closer to reality on their line.
Well, in fact, they actually aren't, because the political system, it's impossible. So first of all, what people need to realize is that the ANC and the EFF combined, if you take all of the African nationalist organizations, ANC, EFF, Pan-African Congress, ZAPO, etc., and you put them all together, collectively, in the last 26 years, they have struggled to get anywhere above 35% in the Western Cape. They struggle. Why? They just don't have the electorate. The majority of the people in the Cape do not support their ideology and their politics. So you have 65% of the Western Cape population that is opposed to this African nationalist political identity. And so the DA loves to terrify their voters and say that if you don't vote for us, the ANC is going to get in, and it's neck and neck, and it's too close to call. It's not even in the same ballpark. The ANC and EFF haven't even started the race yet, and the DA's won the marathon. It is night and day. So that's the first thing. We have a 65% anti-ANC EFF majority in the Cape. And people think that it's first past the post. They think it's like America. So they think, okay, Biden got 49% and Trump got 48%. Therefore, Biden wins. That's not the way it works in South Africa. In South Africa, you can have the DA on 20%, the ANC on 30%, the Cape Party on 20%, and the ACDP on 10%, and the Freedom Front on 10%. And together, the DA is 20%, the Cape Party is 20%, the ACDP is 10%, and the Freedom Front's 10%, collectively makes 60%. And even though the ANC has got the largest chunk at 30%, DA, Cape Party, Freedom Front, ACDP, we collectively form a majority. So essentially your 50% plus one is how you win an election. So you could have the DA on 49.9%, and the Cape Party could have 0.2%, and we could essentially hold the balance of power. Look, obviously,
that's what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay. Remember when the UDM held the balance of power and scuppered that whole ship? I mean, thank goodness that's over for the most part now. They get nine months of like basic form of government, and then we'll see how the elections carry them on. Although I don't think they're going to be voting ANC very much anymore. They've seen what goes down now. Yeah, shame.
But so people need to realize that the best thing they can do for Cape independence is to remove their vote from the DA. They need to take their vote away from the DA. We obviously hope that they'll preferably vote for the Cape Party, because we are absolutely going to fight for a referendum on independence. So they can be guaranteed that we'll do that. So if we can get the DA to 48%, Cape Party has 3%, we would then force the DA, we would give them the majority and say, fine, we'll give you the premiership position, we'll give you the balance of power, but we want one thing and one thing only, and give the people of the Western Cape a referendum on self-determination.
Great. I think on that note, we can terminate the recording.